Hey there. Welcome to The Climate Cycle, a podcast focused on Canada's climate tech ecosystem. In each episode, we sit down with founders building climate solutions right here in Canada to better understand the challenges presented by climate change and what we can do about it. In today's episode, we sit down with Jack Bruner, co-founder at Mammoth Climate. Mammoth empowers companies to achieve their climate goals by mobilizing the workforce. Their platform brings climate literacy and specific actions employees can take to reduce emissions into the workday and helps sustainability teams align these efforts with the company's specific emissions targets. Their work has driven tens of thousands of tons of carbon reduction and removal across their clients, who range from financial institutions to tech companies to universities. In my conversation with Jack, we talk about why so many net zero plans are failing, how sustainability teams can communicate their return on investment, and what it means to build a climate culture at work. Jack also shares his experience leading a fast-growing company, navigating challenging market conditions, and the keys to an effective founding team. Let's get into it. Jack, thanks for joining me.
Justin, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. So we actually spoke for the first time a little over a year ago, kind of right around when you were closing your seed round. Great to kind of reconnect and see where the journey has taken you. Maybe for folks that aren't familiar with Mammoth, could you give a bit of an intro as to what Mammoth Climate does and the problem that you're solving?
For sure. So Mammoth Climate, we empower companies to achieve their climate commitments by turning the workforce into a climate movement. So the core problem we're solving is net zero strategies is broken. 93% of organizations who have launched net zero strategies are failing on their timelines that they'd set for themselves. And when you dig into why this failure rate is so high, it's pretty obvious. There's about a 10% of the organizations who have launched net zero plans have built a bottom-up employee engagement program to pair with it. So employees don't understand what the plan is. They certainly don't understand where they fit into it. Two problems within that. One is we simply can't get to net zero without everyone across the org understanding the plan, playing their role, big or small, toward achieving it. And the second is that employees are desperate. Like employees are individuals. We're all sitting there wondering, how bad the climate crisis is going to be and that we'd like to play a role. Something like 80% of individuals want to be playing a role. So what we do at Mammoth Climate is give every employee across an organization the tools to play an active role in their company's net zero objectives and reward them for doing it. So very in a very high level, employees onboard to the platform. When they do so, they calculate their personal and then their Scope 3 work-related emission sources based on their company's plans, their role at the company, and their uniquely composed footprint. We provide them like a little net zero plan. It's education, tips, tactical challenges to help reduce. And as you do these things, as you progress along your individual journey toward our common goals, we reward you. You earn points. And spend those points at gift cards with sustainable businesses. You could buy carbon removal credits and retire them. You could maybe unlock a portion of your year-end bonus, whatever your company's focused on in a reward sense. So it's been a 3-year journey. We are 30,000 tons into our reduction or removals path with our total community. We've seen 50,000 climate actions taking. Yeah, I guess just summarize it. Mammoth Climate empowers companies to achieve their climate commitments by turning their workforce into a climate movement.
Awesome. That's really cool. Can you speak to a little bit to what some of those actions look like on a tactical sense? If I'm an employee showing up to work, how does that kind of integrate into my day-to-day?
So it will depend on, first of all, where your footprint lies and in your role at the company in the context of your employment. So for instance, if I am commuting to and from the office 2 days of the week and I drive 50 kilometers both directions by car, we may offer a challenge or some focused education or insight around how to reduce the nature of that impact. Commute less often by different forms of transit, maybe incentives for a lower impact transit method, etc. If you work from home entirely, the nature of that category is maybe different. You've got no footprint related to commute, but you do draw energy from the grid based on your working hours and demands. So things like smart plugs for your computer, smart home thermostats, better measurement and reduction of energy demand at your home. So those are kind of the simplest versions that maybe apply to everybody regardless of your role. But then we can do other things. If you have particular categories of materiality in your company's footprint that are owned by a specific individual, maybe a faculty manager or facilities manager at a building who's ultimately going to be the one who have to change off of a gas boiler to a heat pump. You can add that as a challenge in Mammoth and assign a point value to it and assign that task to the individual within the organization who needs to own that change over time. So you can use the platform in a very wide way. And the idea is the challenges map to the source reduction targets that a company will have over a short and long-term period. And everyone has different levels of a role to play in achieving them.
Right. Okay. So it kind of starts with understanding the company's emissions footprint, and then you kind of tailor, okay, there's a larger footprint around the facility manager, and we're going to dedicate some attention there and some resources there, versus if you're maybe a software agency, most of that might be the footprint from employees working from home. Does that kind of capture it?
Yes, bang on. Yeah. The one thing that I didn't mention in the intro there was a big part of the platform's value is its configurability. We map the ability to assign challenges, education, tips to the company's actual context. Its footprint, of course, its sources of materiality, but it's more importantly its path of drawdown. So two companies roll out the platform. It may function very differently for these two companies with the same toolkit, just maybe used in different ways. And then another piece that's really relevant to 99% of companies that we connect with is we've so far talked a lot about reductions and reducing our overall footprint, which is of course the common objective. But a lot of times before you can offer a reduction opportunity, there's a literacy problem to be solved. There's a basic awareness issue. So a lot of times companies will come to us and all they can really articulate so far is that our employees don't get it. They're not on the same page. They don't understand the language being used and the details of these goals, how they need to change. So a lot of how our platform is used, our behavioral science, our behavioral change model, it predicates a relatively long path of education of the individual on what our plan is, fundamentals of climate, and then we layer in challenges along that journey of literacy that progress with the individual in their stage with time.
Gotcha. And do you find that the implementation is more top down, where organizations are coming and saying, we need to drive net zero across the organization and we need to enlist employees? Or is there a certain degree of employees saying, I really care about this, I want to champion this within the company?
That's a great question. Enlisting is a great word, which is military. I bet sustainability leaders wish it was as easy as conscription into it, but it's not always so simple. But there are always groups within an organization who are, your one percenters who are hyper engaged, ready and waiting. They're usually already on some sort of voluntary employee resource group. Usually it's called like a green team.
Right.
And they're pushing things forward, and they're doing so with a very tight budget and frankly kind of at random. And I say at random as in not in sync with what the sustainability team, full-time team, is actually pushing forward in the reduction path. So first thing is we empower a green team group to work in a very structured way and push forward big and small changes in a very structured and measurable way. And then with time, more and more people either join the green team or just become a part of the kind of Mammoth ecosystem as they understand what the program is, they understand the real value opportunity for them, and then leadership starts to echo this idea of it being something that we're very strongly in support of and working toward as common goals. So
right.
Yeah, mandatory, non-mandatory, a term that was used on a call with a client of ours recently.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about, I'd like to get your thoughts on scope 3 emissions. To me, it seems kind of wild in some situations where you have, I don't know, like my home energy use of washing my clothes. Like, is that showing up on my employer's balance sheet? And yeah, I'm kind of just curious to get your thoughts on the effectiveness of scope 3. And are there areas where you think it's the right thing to focus on and it makes a lot of sense, in areas where maybe it is a little, on shakier ground?
A great framing to the scope 3 question. It's such a wide category. It's almost like, they came up with scope 1 and scope 2, and then they got to scope 3, and it was just like, okay, I'm tired. Let's like put it all in there.
Yeah.
So it's messy for sure, and historically, a lot of companies haven't had the push or desire to spend time in scope 3. You know, we measure scope 1, scope 2. We launch a net zero plan based on the source reduction in those categories, and that was enough. But now scope 3, maybe a couple of years ago, it became the most highly progressive companies dove deep into measuring scope 3 and had reduction plans to cover it. And now it's becoming more table stakes to be investing in scope 3. There are definitely companies where, within financial services is a great example. You know, the investments made by a bank or a financial institution, technically they live within scope 3, and it's a very deep, complicated, and can be a very messy category that could be 99% of their total footprint. Regardless of how many offices they have across the world, it's still going to pale in comparison to the impact had by, you know, investing through all, you know, the open markets and through the assets that they own. So a company like that, yes, they really need to be focused almost purely on scope 3. And for anyone out there who's, you know, trying to assess the nature of a financial institution's program, climate plan, you should really be critical of how much of scope 3 are they talking about in this report? How much are they driving reductions in? It's a very complicated path of reduction, but that focus should be there for them. And then the other part of your question was, you know, around the idea of employee and employee action and how it connects back. There's obvious categories, I mean, literal categories that employees draw upon. So there's, you know, business travel, air travel, ground travel, our hotel stays, even the food that we eat, work from home works its way in. These are direct and obvious, our activities, the works, your businesses, your organization's responsibility. And if we're building toward a real true path of net zero, all sources need to be measured. All sources need to have a path of drawdown, including those employee categories. So from my point of view, scope 3 is critical. It's where the action's happening, so to say. And we, as Mammoth, we support filling in many of the categories that most companies find very, very difficult to fill in. So it's a big part of what we do, why companies come to us in the first place, to both measure and then, more importantly, find paths of drawdown in these, you know, complex scope 3 sources. It's all anyone's talking about in a very, very good way.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the work from home aspect of things has really made it kind of, that's where it's the blurriest, I would assume.
Yeah. And it gets even messier. You know, what if you and your spouse or your roommate are both at home working on a given day? Do they share the cost? Do they share the demand? It gets there are clean answers, but it's a complicated decision tree for most companies to figure out.
Yeah, I bet. One thing I was curious as well, on the Mammoth homepage, it seems like there's more of a focus on emissions reductions and less so on offsetting. And previously, offsetting seemed like it was playing a bigger role. Is there a reason for that shift towards emissions reductions as opposed to offsets?
Well, we're responding most importantly to what our clients are looking for at the end of the day. The biggest issues that companies come to us with in the typical order of events is our employees don't understand the plan. We're not progressing toward our reduction targets, and we're missing key data points, key emission sources in our footprint. Offsetting is a layer on top, typically, of this overarching strategy. Most companies have a thoughtful approach to investing in carbon removals or avoidance credits, but the way that we have evolved is not to say, come out of the gate and measure and offset 100% of emission sources, but use removals as a thoughtful part of the whole engagement model for the most part. We have the ability as an employee to earn points as I engage, and then I can take those points and fund removals projects. The company as well can be funding them on your behalf if they so wish. But it's a part of the engagement model, and they're wonderful because they're so tangible, right? Especially when you're in this community context of a workforce, you're looking for, common projects, common ideas to be supporting. So they are a very powerful part of the story, but emissions reduction is our de facto problem between now and 2050, and carbon removals play a large role as well, but we've reorganized where they fit, at least in our model.
Yeah. It seems to mimic, I think, wider thinking around offsets and removal as well, and seeing that as, we need emissions reductions as the bulk of our climate action. And there's a layer on top of that that is carbon removal, carbon projects to extract. So it seems like there's a lot of alignment there with kind of the overall, what your customers are looking for, but also kind of what the wider climate science is telling us.
Definitely. But I do want to emphasize that removals play a big role in our large our civilization-wide strategy to fight climate change. So I think it's the offsets and removals, they're an easy finger to point and saying, oh, that's just, funding a project and not solving the source problem. But it's not always as simple. We do need to continue investing heavily in removals for a very, very long time to drain the tub long term. So we hope to not ever be, degrading the nature of what an offset can do, because in the long term, the right projects, they'll have a huge, huge, huge impact, a really important lever. So yeah, we need both. But we are a behavioral science and climate company, and we're focused primarily on reductions because of that.
Yeah, awesome. We were talking before we hit record around, it's been a pretty big six months to a year. Could you maybe tell me a bit about what's evolved over the past year and kind of some of the milestones that your company has gone through, or kind of iterations?
It's been a wild 6 months, a year at least. Yeah, it's been at least a year of craziness in a good way. Well, I guess the big bullets would be we've grown by 4.5x year over year. It's about a 27% monthly growth rate over the past 6 months alone. Our team's more than doubled in size, so we've got many more brains trying to solve this problem. Those are the most important three, I would say. From a market and response perspective, where the sustainability market leaders is focused. We talked about it earlier, but this idea of digging into scope 3 and its very long tail nature of emissions into all these really granular sources that we need to figure out, measure, but then find reduction paths of. That's kind of worked backwards to a renewed and more heightened focus on mobilizing employees, right? Sustainability leaders are typically teams of 1 to 10, maybe 15 at very mature companies. And that's not enough. They cannot solve scope 3 on their own. So I think the fact that we have this really heightened focus on scope 3 is making sustainability leaders realize, okay, we need everybody working in lockstep. We need everyone understanding our emissions measurement and reduction goals, or else we're not going to achieve 2030, 2035.
Right.
So all of that is, I think, what's driven the growth on our end. And it's very exciting because I think it's one of the core problems that are impeding our real progression toward corporate net zero timelines of net zero. So
cool. Yeah. Speaking about the market, so it seems like there is a growing awareness around scope 3 and a growing desire to tackle these. How has the last year's market conditions around, inflation and high interest rates and all of that, have you found that that's had an impact on how customers are thinking about this problem? It would be easy to deprioritize this. You're focused on profitability, you're focused on all of these things, scope 3 and sustainability. It would be easy to kind of say, this isn't the priority right now.
It's been a hard year. It's definitely been a hard year. We are seeing differences by industry and by state of maturity of these sustainability teams and organizations. So definitely highly impacted industries of this market downturn. Yes, they're turning inward. They're finding ways to reduce cost and not add necessarily anything new. So sometimes we are seeing when sustainability internally doesn't have an ROI equation associated with it, it's been very quick to get cut, and that's disheartening. But there are many categories. There are companies who are, have certain market or publicly traded reporting requirements coming. There are very consumer-focused B2C sorts of businesses whose brands and engagement in and achievement of the net zero goals they'd set are really important to their consumer markets. There are scenarios of competitive advantage where sustainability is a big part of their company's distinctive factor. These organizations are full speed ahead. We definitely have reduced, the market overall has reduced because the ones who aren't on as sure footing have had to kind of pare back. But there's still this very large core of companies who are full steam ahead. Ultimately, this problem isn't going anywhere. If anything, it's just getting hotter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're just finding a different layer of focus in who we speak with, but the desire is stronger and stronger every day to figure it out with them.
Gotcha. Can you talk a little bit about climate culture and maybe speak to, you're talking about the sustainability teams in in companies and trying to associate some ROI. I would love for you to talk a little bit about, if you have any tips or thoughts on how sustainability teams could be talking about this, as well as what is this climate culture idea that you're bringing to the table?
Yes. Yeah. So climate culture is a term my co-founder, Jeff Packer, coined, and it is the fully formed version of, I guess, what you'd imagine a Mammoth Climate workforce to be. It is having climate awareness deep within everyone in the organization. It's factors woven into decision-making, our cultural fabric, our common identity within the organization. So climate culture is everyone on board, everyone understanding where we're headed and why we're there, and working in favor of the person to the left and to their right. So as an organization where the climate landscape is very wide, there's many different companies solving very different problems. We intersect at climate and behavioral science. Is where I like to think about it. And in order to achieve something as grand and amazing as a climate culture at your organization, you kind of need to appreciate both what it means to have effective change management and what human nature is. And I guess over the past, 6 months, maybe a year, we've really solidified some core learnings on, how to do those two things well and create climate culture. There's three variables. It's personalization, accessibility, and incentive. So on personalization, employees are just like you and I. We access algorithms all day, hyper-personalized, telling us stories that are of interest to us, that are relevant to us, that makes me feel seen in the content that I'm receiving. Employees are no different. You simply can't build a single training session for the entire organization to join for everyone to then have the box checked of understanding the plan. So you need to find ways to create personalized journeys, tailored journeys of literacy and engagement paths that are relevant to an individual's interests, role, function, department, all of these variables, or else they'll tune it out because the bar is very high.
Yeah.
That's personalization. The second is accessibility. This one's easy. We're all busy, right? Everyone's got a full plate already. So if you want them to learn something new or change the way that they do something, you better make it easy to understand, to get off their plate. And this is in large part why we've built and launched our Teams and Slack apps. So the whole Mammoth experience actually arrives with employees neatly within their workday, within Teams and Slack. So all the tips, challenges, content, education pieces, they all will just neatly arrive in a Slack channel with you. The third is incentive. I think most important of all, we have a carrot or a stick available to us to drive behavioral change. We see a lot of policy oriented around sticks. I think if we want to do it within consumer markets and individuals, we need it to be a win-win. We need carrots. So incentive structures matter in a big way. If you want someone to do something new, you need to give them reason to want to do it. At the end of the day, we don't show up to work because we love it so much that we gift our time.
Yeah.
There is a value exchange. So this should be no different. But those are the three: personalization, accessibility, and incentive. That's what we've learned about, how to create effective climate culture and productive behavioral change and change management.
Cool. Yeah. Any tips for sustainability leads looking to kind of make the pitch for whether it's Mammoth Climate or just building out a climate program that you've, maybe picked up some tips from the past 2 years of,
Yeah. Keep it focused, very focused. So pick a specific problem. That problem could be literacy in our net zero plan. That could be reducing commute. Reach out to your sustainability team and ask what they're focused on and help them progress their plan. You mentioned ROI. If you can find a certain policy shift or opportunity change that has to happen toward your journey of net zero that will drive reductions, you can champion that. An idea might be very simply, for instance, if we only as an organization from now on purchased refurbished computers most people don't know, but that's about an 80% reduction in the emissions associated with the purchase. There's also usually a 20% cost reduction associated with it. So if you've got 40,000 employees at your company, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings a year. So we need to be seeking that ROI story, or else sustainability will be always on the chopping block in a market downturn potentially. So seek that ROI story.
That makes a lot of sense to both focus, and it sounds like a prioritization aspect as well, to focus on some of those high impact areas. Okay, so you mentioned a huge amount of growth over the past year, both in the company and customers, but also in the team. On a more personal note for you as a founder, what have been some of the highlights from the past year?
Well, maybe it doesn't fit into the years perfectly.
Sure.
My wife and I, we had a baby boy. He's
amazing.
He's about a year and a half, so just outside of the range. Look, we were fundraising our pre-seed back when my wife was pregnant, and it at the time necessarily wasn't always going well. Fundraising is hard, and it was a very nerve-wracking experience to be bringing a baby into our life and having this startup baby.
Right.
And these questions of like, can I endure this truly? Like, will I be able to keep up this workload? Will my risk tolerance change financially? What will investors think? What will my co-founders think? These all weighed very, very heavily. And I guess to your question, what was the highlight of the year? All of those questions I would ask myself back then, they all seem so irrelevant. He's such a source of energy in my life, and I feel like I do more because of it, and it makes me a more a whole person with wider perspective. I don't know, I don't know how to really summarize it well, but just having him and our family grow ended up being this huge positive over the past year. Particularly, he's at daycare now, so he's getting me sick all the time, so it's hard, but yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting to hear it kind of be an energy booster, and kind of, it's almost like you tapped into batteries you didn't know you had.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone out there listening, you're going to be okay. Yeah.
Nice. What about some of the bigger challenges from the last year?
Well, we've undergone as an organization a pretty major shift. I don't want to call it a pivot necessarily, but it's been a narrative shift, a focus shift, who we are seeking to work with, how we seek to work with them. So managing a focus shift and a functionality, like a product roadmap shift, is fraught with risk typically. We don't have the benefit of, huge amount of room for mistakes. You can only shift so many times as an organization. So we put a lot of attention as a group of founders and founding team to really deeply find the data proof points on why the shift is needed, how we can do it in the most productive way. And it just takes a lot of mental energy to get there and make sure everyone's moving in the same direction cleanly. And I'm proud of everyone on the team who's been able to just do it with such grace, because looking back, a lot had to change, and we did it so fluidly, but it was not without hard work.
Nice. Is there anything that's been harder than you expected as the team has grown specifically?
I was going to say, maybe not hard. So I was going to say delegation has been difficult for me. This is very human, personal.
Yeah.
Not because I'm a control freak. In fact, I think I'm very much the opposite. But when you're scaling something from nothing, you do it all. You and your co-founders, you do it all. So you've got all this knowledge locked in your head and not documented perfectly, and some system is like an abbreviation that you made up and no one knows what that means, and no one else could take it over. So I found it more difficult to get it out of my head, get it onto paper, and start to share it. But it happens with time. I was critical of myself and my ability to delegate at a point. So it was harder than I thought, and I created more on my plate than I probably needed to for 5-6 months there. But we've got a lot of it on paper now.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone that has not struggled with delegation in any type of leadership role, but particularly, as you said, where so much of this has been in your co-founders' heads, and trying to just get that out so someone can take it on it. And it often feels slow, I think, is one of the hard parts. Like, how do we slow down to write this down?
Yes.
I'll just do it.
Yeah, that's the problem, because you're always in this all-out sprint sort of feeling that slowing down doesn't feel like the right move, but the go slow to speed up mentality was, it's very, very important to force yourself to feel.
Nice. Somewhat related. For you and your co-founding team, what have you found to be maybe any like tips or thoughts on having an effective co-founding team where for some people it could be too many cooks in the kitchen, coordination across people? Is there anything that you've found works really well?
I would say that like a marriage, you go through phases as founders, right? There are hard times, there are easy times. It's really easy to be great founders as partners when all you're seeing is growth and green and great feedback from clients. But in the hard times, there's two things. We have this saying, no ego, amigo. That's one thing that we try and say and keep it top of mind, that decision-making needs to be for the company first, and your role, your sense of identity, these things are all made up in your head. So let's make sure that we're prioritizing what's best for the common good. So just that mentality of just, no bullshit with one another. And then the other is do things with your founders that aren't work.
Oh yeah.
Go have a drink, go karting together. Do something that's like human, because you can build up all these stories in your head because it gets dense, it gets, a word gets misused or whatever, and it just can spiral so quickly. So you need the diffuser somewhere. And I found it fun to just go do stuff, and that doesn't exist, have a one-on-one meeting that's about nothing with your partner once in a while.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point though, about the stories going on, and you have an interpretation of something, someone said something, you carry that with you, and it's completely, you're the only one that's experiencing that and trying to catch that and navigate it in your head so you can still have like a productive relationship.
It's very much a muscle to build. It's like meditation in a sense. Watching your emotional reactions is very difficult, but I think that's a really big theme. Just being supportive of the common instead of thinking about yourself in too much of an individual's lens.
Yeah, cool. You've been really generous with your time. I'm going to just end with a quick rapid fire. So 3 quick questions. You kind of already touched on this, but any advice for someone looking to get into climate that hasn't made the jump yet?
Reach out to someone who inspires you, is working on something that's interesting to you. Climate and sustainability are incredibly helpful people. It's a 1 + 1 = 2 mentality. I guarantee they'll talk to you. They'll at least forward you along to someone else who'll be relevant. So make the jump and just start by talking to someone who's inspiring to you.
Love it. What is a book, podcast, or newsletter that you would recommend someone check out?
We'll do both. Well, newsletter, Climate Tech Canada, of course.
Obviously.
I do read it religiously. Matthew Bertulli, CEO of Pila and Lomi, he writes a newsletter as well. That's fantastic. I recommend. Book. So I'm reading, it's a bit dense, but it's called Meditations. It's by Marcus Aurelius. He's a Roman emperor and one of the founding minds behind Stoicism. It's just this incredible, articulate application of Stoicism, which is just this mentality of control what you can, which is ultimately your emotional reaction to situations, and that ultimately we all are in service of one another. So common good mentality. Highly recommend it. It's called Meditations.
Love that. Finally, any asks for the audience or people that are listening?
Well, if you work for or are close to an organization who's got a net zero strategy of some kind that you think might be interested in the idea of mobilizing employees to play a more active role in it, I'd love to chat with you. You can reach out to me. My email is jack@mammothclimate.io. You could also go to our website and submit the contact form. But I'd love to help you do more to progress your company's climate objectives.
Fantastic. Jack, thanks so much for coming on and coming back to talk to us. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a great day, Justin.
You too.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot and helps grow the show. To stay in the loop on Canadian climate tech news, recent fundraising, job postings, events, and more, subscribe to the Climate Tech Canada newsletter on our website. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.